Today we're going to talk portfolios. You're going to have a lot of time in class today to work on your portfolio, which is a good thing given how much time we have left in the semester. So I want you to take that time and really think about it. I'm going to lecture about the cover. You may or may not elect to work on the cover. I suggest that you work on the cover in the handout, but if you want to work on the layout, that's okay too. I'm perfectly okay. It's basically a day to work on your portfolio. It's a day to ask me questions and that sort of thing. So let's go through portfolio covers. What belongs on the cover in the first place? Well, number one, it needs to have your name on it. And I think that's the one thing that is a standard. You have to put your name on it. If you don't put your name on it, you have no idea whose portfolio it is. So it's a good idea to put your name on it at least somewhere. Even in Alex Holgraff's example, it's all black with the volume 4 on the side. There's a tiny little piece where his name is. So there's always that name. Now, what else do you put on it? You could put things like portfolio, design portfolio, industrial design portfolio, whatever, selected works. It's kind of all in that theme. Some people like to put that sort of thing. Some people don't. In some instances, you have requirements, like if you're applying for the master's program at Berkeley, you have to say what candidate status you are. So like for me, when I applied to go to grad school, it was Grant Adams option 2 candidate, because I was an option 2 candidate. So sometimes there's other things that you end up having to put on there. But for your purposes today, this is kind of a generic portfolio. You might hand it to a job. You might hand it to a school. It's just, this is where I am in school right now. This is my work. So you're probably not putting something specific on it. But you could put selected works or portfolio or whatever. But again, that's up to you. It's a personal preference. It could just be your name. And I'll show you some examples with just that. Some people also like to include a year or a date range. In the case of Alex Holgraff's here, he has volumes, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, etc. It's kind of all the same thing. Remember that portfolio is a living document. It should only contain projects that you've done in the last 3 to 5 years or so. That changes a little bit when you get in your career a little bit further along, because you might want to include certain projects as you go forward. But generally speaking, it's 3 to 5 years is what you're looking at in terms of your projects. So having a year or date range can sometimes solidify, hey, this is the work I've done in this time frame. But again, that's optional. So examples, I've broken these into 3 categories. The first category is text only, and I'm a little loose with the definition. Like this one has a little bit of a logo next to it, but the idea here is that it's dominated by just text. That's the big piece of it. You're focused on the text, and you're then reading what it has to say. So typically that text would be your name and/or something like architecture portfolio. Another example here, very simple, very plain, and that's perfectly reasonable. Obviously, typography, font choice matters. So you want to make sure you're not picking, Comic Sans, for example, to pick on. Or papyrus. Don't you dare pick papyrus. Sometimes people add little signatures or little initials or whatever, some handwriting. I think this one is really nicely done. My signature and handwriting does not look that elegant, so I would never put mine on there. So just because you like the idea, if your initials or handwriting isn't attractive or flowy or it doesn't look like that, don't do it. Does that make sense? So don't just say, oh, I like the idea, let me throw my signature on there. If it's really attractive, then yeah, maybe it works. If it's not, skip it. Still dominated by text. This one feels more like a web page to me. And interestingly enough, he's a web designer, so somehow that relates together. But it's certainly an option. The name is right there.
What?
Yeah, it is there. It is there. I told you it was a requirement. So the name is there. Would I choose to do this on my portfolio? Probably not. I think your name should probably be a little bit bigger in the hierarchy. But again, that's more of a personal preference as you go forward. So we've got color in this one. A lot of the other ones have been plain. We move from just the plain text to text with an abstract background behind it. And so this is a background that is not something that's specific to your work. It's something that maybe you created, it's a drawing that you did, it's a model that you made, but it just kind of lives there. You don't know what it is. So in this case, it's a perfect example. You've got the candidate's name or the person's name, design portfolio, and then you have this kind of shadowy thing going on. So we don't know what projects it's related to. We're not seeing anything specific in the design process, but it's giving a little taste of the kinds of things he might be interested in going forward. Same kind of thing here with the twisting shape, just kind of a background graphic. This one was probably trendy in about 2008 or so. You know, could you do something like this in Photoshop or whatever? Sure, that's fine. I don't mind the ink splot so much. It's the wrinkled paper with the drop shadow sticking on top. It's just like, yeah, it's a little dated. So remember, in a portfolio, it's a document that you're going to be working with and having live with you for a while. You probably don't want something that ends up being too dated 10 years later. Another example here, this is just like a texture. It's a brushed metal texture. This might be a little challenging to print depending on the quality of the printer. The other thing I like to point out is the font choice is very, very thin. And it works on a projector that's this big, that's bright. We could still read it. But if you were to print this, it would not turn out. All those would get muddled together. You wouldn't see enough clarity. So be aware that it's different whether you're looking at it online or whether you're looking at it in print form. For our purposes in this class, you are required to print it. I will look at the print version of it. So it's really important that you think about that print quality at the end and what it looks like. I think portfolios are kind of an interesting thing because there's still a certain physicality to them. There's still a certain assumption that you could have a printed portfolio and hand it to somebody. We're moving in the direction of the online portfolios. People are saying, hey, just email me your portfolio. Let me see it in a PDF, and they skip through it that way. So we're going that direction, but there's still something to that physical document, that book that you can hand somebody. And so something like this might not turn out as well in book form. So this is another thing people do with words. So this obviously says portfolio and the person's name. I have no idea who this is. If you're out there in the ether, I'm sorry, I'm ripping your work apart, but it is the way it is. So I find this incredibly difficult to read. Like graphically, it's interesting, but okay, is that a T? Oh yeah, it says portfolio. But there's a lot of concentration involved. I mean, there isn't even a little tiny break here or here to designate that they're different letters. It just kind of all runs together. So be aware that doing something creative like this might make it more difficult for the person reading it. And the person reading it, the last thing you want to do is on the cover say, oh, that's awful. Toss it to the side. Remember, in a portfolio, you're applying for a job, you're applying to grad school, you're applying to, or they're reviewing it to pick what studio you're going to be in at Berkeley. They don't have time to sit and look at every portfolio for 10 minutes. They're never going to spend that amount of time. They're literally going to spend about 30 seconds looking at your portfolio. Maybe you get a minute. That's it. So cover, critical, grab their attention. First page, awesome. Second page, wow, this looks great. Third page, okay, that's pretty good. Flip, 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 flip. Last page, nice. Good pile, bad pile, right? That's about all you get. So you have to think about it in that context. What are you giving somebody in that short read? Obviously, you want it to read if somebody's looking at it for a longer period of time. And maybe you get in a job interview, maybe they give it that for a cursory look, and then they break it into piles and say, hey, this is the one that deserves a little bit longer look. I know in grad school, during the application process, I'm using that because it's a good example of the kind of application processes that you're going to end up going through as you go forward. But in grad school, what they would do is at Berkeley, when I was there, every year they gave away, let's say, 20 spots to students. And they'd have somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 people apply to them to maybe 10,000 people apply to them. So very small odds at getting in. Lots of portfolios to look through, right? So the faculty that were on the board that was deciding who got in, they didn't look at all 5,000 portfolios. I can promise you that. So what they do is they get grad students and they say, hey, here's a group of 50 portfolios. Look through them and tell us which ones are good that are worth looking at. So they'd get that big stack of portfolios and people would look through and look through and look through. Yeah, this is the good stack. Here's about 10. And then you'd whittle down and somebody else would look through that stack and whittle it down. So you see how it keeps going. So you need to be able to impress somebody quickly and easily with your portfolio. That's how you get moved on. So another example here, kind of abstract building. If you did this as a background, you're presenting yourself as a more technical person. I want to do working drawings, not necessarily design work. So you want to think about what it is in the background. Even though the background doesn't matter, because it's just background, it's giving an impression of who you are and what your interests might be. This one actually is made out of metal. So binding that might be a little bit challenging. You can see there's some screws and whatever. Just the kind of the abstract background. I have to pick on this one a little bit too because, and my iPad's not charged. Otherwise, I'd draw on the screen. But okay, so we've got the abstract background. We've kind of done the rule of thirds. This is happening on the third. Okay, so compositionally, it's reasonable. Maybe I'd move this down if I were doing it, but fine. This space and this space are different. Furthermore, this and this are different. So right off the bat, as soon as I read your name, I'm going, wow, your attention to detail isn't there. So how you present it is really important because you're giving me an impression, and I'm saying me in a global sense because in your case, I'm evaluating you, but it could be an employer, it could be anybody else. You're giving them a sense of who you are and what your attention to detail might be. That's really important. So this one is the abstract photograph background with kind of the grungy concrete texture in it. There's a certain material nature to it, and I think it's pretty nice. This might be more for urban design planning. Lo and behold, yep, there it is, because we're using kind of the cityscape as the backdrop. I would hope that this line, this flow line, continued through the rest of the portfolio, that we'd see that same flow line. So there's a clue on the cover as to what's coming inside. This one's oddly satisfying. I have no idea what the person and the blocks mean, but it's just kind of interesting. Compositionally, it's kind of interesting. The text against the little composition of random shapes and blocks, and then the random person that's standing down there. It's just kind of unique. I think this one is an actual cover that goes all the way around. So we've got a spine in the middle as it folds around. Not quite sure why it has a barcode on it. Such is life. I mean, you know, some people, like Alex Holgraf does sell his portfolio as example work. And so maybe that's why it belongs there. I've seen this one done kind of in a trendy manner. It was popular for a while, where you did a cityscape of some kind, and then your work was down below as an architecture portfolio. In fact, I have a couple examples of the same kind of thing. It's not the best, in my opinion, but it is an example. Here's an Alex Holgraf. I think he does a great job. You can look at his website to see kind of his portfolios and how he divides up the background and emphasize certain pieces of it, which pieces become gray, which pieces become black. It's a pretty dynamic portfolio. He has several versions of it. This is what it looks like folded flat. So you can kind of get an idea of what it would look like if it wrapped all the way around your particular piece. So examples, this set is all going to be with some kind of a work or a project, something that the person did that's showcasing who they are. And so it's set up a little bit differently than the other ones. And one of the important things about this is you have to have work that's worthy of going on the cover, because it's representative of you, and it could turn somebody off immediately if they don't like your work that's on the cover, and not even let them inside. So you really have to think about what your work looks like when it goes on the cover. You know, I wouldn't pick this person in some modernist design institution. Like if I was working for a modernist firm, no. You know, so you gotta kind of think about what you're presenting to somebody. I think this is one of the best covers I've ever seen. It's a great, fantastic cover. I could never personally do this because my sketches never look that good. Compositionally, it's good. It's got strong diagonal. As we look at something like this, it's like, oh, that's beautiful. And I'm so excited to see what this person's work is. So if you're good at this kind of sketching, then by all means put this on the cover. But if you're not, don't just throw a sketch on the cover because you think it's going to make you look cool. Does that make sense? So you really have to think and control this sort of thing. This person is interested in landscape, so it makes sense that they're kind of featuring the landscape. I like this one too. It's kind of a different take on it. the very dark with the light. So I would assume that this person is interested in light and how light goes through space, etc. So you're giving some clue about what this person would be about. And again, I haven't seen most of these portfolios anyway. So this one has the cityscape with the red tone behind it. And I'm not quite sure whether this is like, you know, they're going after the Walking Dead look or something. I don't quite know where he's going with this. This wouldn't be my choice. But it is certainly a strategy to cause your work to stand out. Another example with the sketches. And I think this one also works really nice and is really clean. But again, you have to be able to do this quality of sketch and then also kind of compose it. You can see that this is a photograph of a piece of trace laying on top of another piece of trace. There's just a little bit of the photo here. There's a little bit of shadow. It's set up just right from a lighting standpoint, and then she snapped the picture. So it looks casual, but it's completely staged. And that's really important. Strong diagonal, everything's composed right. So if you're going to do something like this, you have to think very carefully about how everything's set up, what the angle is. It might take you several, if not 100, photos to get just the right angle with the right look, with the right cropping and all the rest of it to have this show up really nice and clean. But it turned out really nice in the end. So it's definitely a strategy. It's a little bit more of like, I'm a student and this is my work in progress and I'm learning how to design, and it feels very process oriented as opposed to something that's more finished product oriented. I think one of the challenges with something like this is it's the night render, which everybody wants to do the night render, but for those of you that have taken my 136 class with Rhino, we talk a lot about lighting and how the night render is all about the light. And if you look at this, okay, this is really just a day render with a night background to it. All we have is the sunlight, we have no internal lights and whatever. So if you're going to showcase something like this, especially on the cover, make sure you really know how to do it. You know, like Alex Holgreth could showcase something like this on his cover, and you'd be intrigued because it's so beautiful, because he really understands how to do night renderings. So just be aware of what you're showing and what it reflects on you. It's a cover. So text with a model background. So some people are inherently good at building models. And if you're really good at building models, it's a great place to put your models, would be on the cover. They're kind of abstract, but they can really showcase who you are and how you work. I had a student who sat next to me for a semester in grad school who did all of his design work through models. And it was exhausting to watch him. But we would have class, we'd have our 4-hour studio on Monday, and he would build between 1 and 10 models for Wednesday. And then we'd have our next meeting on Friday, and he'd build another 1 to 10 models. I mean, he just produced models. And it was always like these models. And they were kind of half-finished, and they were exploring the design. But he never drew anything. He just built models. And so it would make complete sense in his portfolio to put a model on the cover and to show all these models and his process work. It's just how he thought and how he designed. And so it's kind of an interesting way of presenting your work and showing what it is that you're interested in. The other thing that people tend to like to do is they like to reveal part of the work underneath the cover. So you have to think about how you cut it out so that nothing falls out completely and that it's stable enough. These two examples were done in acrylic, so it's a little bit more of a rigid cover, though you could do it with like a watercolor or I think a watercolor 140-pound, 160-pound cold press would stand up to it a little bit. But you have to think about, one, what it is that you're cutting out, and two, what's showing from the underside. Because what shows through is really important as part of your cover. So you have to kind of script what the interior page looks like in addition to what the exterior page looks like.